evening, everyone. I'm going to call to order the Thursday, March 6, 2014, Abington School Building Committee meeting. First on the agenda is the approval of the February 4, 2014 School Building Committee meeting minutes.
Motion approved.
Second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? None, motion carried. Next on the agenda is the MSBA update for the Preferred Schematic Solutions Supplement. We had a very good call with the MSBA earlier in the week. I'm going to ask Mary and Scott just to give a quick update on the call, the outcome, and the deliverables of the call.
So previously we had submitted a supplement to MSBA, which we had reviewed at your last building committee meeting, and including local approvals by both the building committee, school committee, and board of selectmen. That's been reviewed by MSBA. We conducted a conference call with them on Friday with representatives of the building committee, school district, AI3, and myself. MSBA generally commended AI3 for the work that they've performed in advancing the designs to the point that they are presently. And they reviewed somewhat minor comments that they had on the submission package. I think that I forwarded to you all the meeting minutes from that conference. Each of the items that they reviewed should be easily responded to. Since that conference call, we did receive the formal correspondence related to their review comments yesterday. There were no surprises. It was basically the exact same information that was discussed on Friday. The only difference being that during Friday's conversation, the representatives from MSBA indicated that response to their comments could be incorporated into the schematic design. It did not require a formal response. The correspondence from MSBA that was received yesterday indicated that a formal response was required, and the deadline for that response is March 12th. I followed up with MSBA, and they did confirm that they do expect a formal response from the district regarding the questions. And I just kind of think there's 9 questions that are in the review comments. Already sent an email out and kind of worked with AI3 already to start on the process of answering them. We're also going to use time in tomorrow's working session to follow up with the district on it. I think there's really on 2 items that they need to give us some information on. So I don't see any issue with being able to respond in time for the March 12th deadline, and that deadline is required for us to go to the March 26th board meeting. MSBA has indicated that we are not required to go back to the Facilities Assessment Subcommittee, which was the March 16th date. So that is no longer required, and that barring any issue or the fact that we don't respond by the 12th, we will be on the agenda for the board meeting for March 26th to approve the preferred schematic study and allow us to gain authorization to do schematic design.
Thank you, Mary. Any questions about the MSBA comments? Okay. Next on the agenda is the design update from Scott.
Thank you, Rich. Tonight we're going to talk primarily about some site development and some site-related issues. I want to introduce a couple of people who are with us tonight that are part of our design and engineering team. Art Eddy is a landscape architect. He's the owner of Birchwood Design, which is the landscape architecture firm that has worked with us on all of our projects for as long as I can remember. And so they have great familiarity with high school, middle school projects. As landscape architects, their focus would be on the fields, obviously the landscaping for the site, helping us to organize a lot of different elements of the site. And because ultimately their job is to help us to design a very good functioning site plan, they work very closely with PAR Engineering, and Carrie Orsi is here tonight from PAR Engineering on civil design and site design elements like the topography of the site, the drainage on the site. PAR Engineering is currently leading the geotechnical investigation on the site. All the subsurface investigation will be completed with their oversight. The topographical and boundary survey that we've had done was done through them with their oversight. So together, Birchwood Design and Par Engineering make up our total site team. And there are a number of people. The working group met Andrew Shagnon from Par Engineering last week. A number of people from Par work with us. A number of people from Birchwood work with us, but they represent the site piece of it. And we invited them to join us tonight because we're going to talk a little bit about updating the site. But as we have started to talk with the working group about the site in general, some other kind of related issues like the play fields and synthetic turf, and would a portion of the fields be synthetic turf or would they not? And we've certainly commented that for our past several high school projects, particularly if they involved a high community use, at least one synthetic turf field has been done as part of the project. And it tends to be a topic that a lot of people are interested in. So tonight we've specifically asked Art to come to just talk a little bit about synthetic turf, pros and cons, the payback in terms of cost, efficiencies associated with it, additional play time, all those topics that we'll eventually be talking about when you collectively decide as a committee and as a town what the turf and playfield component of the project will be. So I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about the adjustments we've made to the overall site plan since you last saw it, and then I'm going to ask Art to talk a little bit about the playfield and synthetic turf component. We'd like to get the building committee's input. We had a little bit of discussion with the working group, but wanted to get the full building committee's input because it's going to be one of the things that we'll be talking about as we go out to the public and the greater community over the next few months, talking about this project and what the possibilities are and what the opportunities are. And interestingly enough, even though our goal is to design an amazing educational facility that will transform the educational environment, we often find that the groups that will be utilizing the play fields in the areas outside of the building are sometimes the most engaged and interested in exactly what's going on. So we certainly dedicate a lot of time to that as well. Just a few updates regarding the site plan. This site plan will look very similar, and I think everybody has the handout with this. Will look very similar to the prior versions. There's some minor adjustments that we've made to the site plan that I just want to highlight. We've talked a number of times about entry and exit points to the site, and even as recently as this past week, we had another good discussion with the working group about exactly what the access would be to the site, and meaning how the buses and autos would get separated, how parking would be, how autos would be allowed to come into the site and not interfere with the buses, exactly how the parking lot at the front of the site would function. This particular site plan shows a bus drive coming in to the site and then coming back out of the site. That would be a one-way drive, and then it shows a separate auto drive coming into the parking area that would allow somebody to come right through and come back around the school to the other areas of parking and field amenities. But we are working on a plan that would perhaps combine a drive for a section through here and allow autos and buses to share that piece of the drive before they kind of break off and the buses go this way and the autos go this way or into the parking lot, because we really want to avoid duplicating the design and installation of a long extended drive that might not be used except for a short period of the day. Keeping in mind that when this is not being utilized by the buses for a drop-off drive, it would be the visitors drop-off, and everybody who's coming to the building during the day, who's a visitor who parks here, or maybe is dropping somebody off or picking somebody off, picking somebody up. If it wasn't during a time when the buses were dropping off or picking up, they'd be able to utilize this drive. But we want to work on some version of this site layout that perhaps combines that drive for a period of time before it breaks off and becomes buses only in one direction and autos in the other direction. We've also talked a lot about, because the pre-K component is located on this corner, we've discussed the pre-K parking being in this zone with marked spaces specifically for the pre-K parents to come and take their students, park their cars, take their children inside the building. We've also talked about it perhaps being in this zone. You see it in this particular sketch in this zone, but we continue to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of having it here versus this parking area. There's some advantages and disadvantages to either one. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter. Even no matter how we discuss it now, it could always be marked differently at some point in the future, as long as we have parking close to the pre-K entry in both of these areas. We've also adjusted the drive that wraps around the pre-K entry. It may be hard to see in this particular image, but there's a pull-off lane that really allows somebody who comes in, or a van that comes in, to circulate through the parking lot, come back around, and literally pull off to the side in a third lane and be able to drop off students, pre-K students at that portion of the building. And by third lane, I mean a lane that is separate and distinct from the other two lanes that would be through here that would allow two-way traffic to go through here. So we've created that lane so that the appropriate number of vans could stack in that area for unloading. We've also increased, just a very subtle change, but we've increased the length of the bus staging lane to make sure we can accommodate a minimum of 8 buses in that particular area. We've made an adjustment to the tennis court area as a result of additional topographical and boundary survey information that's been received, and a more clear understanding of the exact delineation of this particular edge of the site. One of the things that we presented to the working group through the update was the fact that initially we wanted to shift the building as far to the left-hand side or west side of the site as possible. And we had thought that we might be able to shift some of the drive or some of the parking or even the building further into this green area that you see right here. But it's clear after doing the topographical and boundary survey and some of the additional wetlands investigation that was done by Par Engineering that this in fact needs to remain, is clearly a wetlands area and was probably cleared at some point in time under the idea that it might be a field area, and once they realized how wet it remains, they didn't utilize it as a field after all. But we'll need to stay out of the area that you see there in green. It doesn't really affect our ability to develop same building, same parking, same layout we always have had. It just means that it confirmed that we really can't slide anything else over into that area. I mentioned slight reconfiguration of the tennis courts, more for flow than for anything else. We are continuing to remember that we may want to make some kind of minimal connection for a purely emergency access point on this edge of the site. And to us, that simply means that if there were an emergency where you needed to get into the site in some means other than Glenwood's Way, that there wouldn't be any trees or any physical barrier obstructing you from being able to go across this part of the site and into the connector, into the neighborhood area here. It doesn't mean that we're going to have a drive going out there. May not necessarily mean that there'll even be a hard surface. It means that we'll just be conscious of the fact that there wouldn't be any physical barrier there should there be an emergency and need to get into the site some other way. On this particular site plan, we've also made an adjustment to the roadway, even along Glenwood's Way, to assume that we're going to create an area where if a parent wanted to drop off without coming completely into the site, there would be a pull-off lane right here along the area, along this area, so that it limits the amount of congestion in terms of people trying to come all the way into the site. It can be very attractive to have that kind of opportunity. It can be a really quick drop-off area in the morning. Trying to remember if there were any other significant adjustments to the site. The area outside of both the high school and the middle school, there's a little bit of adjustment to the parking area because now although we considered these as entry points at some point in time, we're really focused now on the fact that high school entry will be on this corner, middle school entry on this corner, and then secondary middle school entry right here, and secondary high school entry right here. And so those are the four kind of primary entry points, keeping in mind that there'll be doors and entry points all around the perimeter of the building for egress and exit, etc. But in terms of secured entry points, those are going to be the four main proposed points of the entry.
Scott, I noticed that you added a turnaround point on the middle school side by the tennis courts, which will be helpful because people will not necessarily have to go around the whole building.
We did. Our intent there is because we've discussed two different means of circulation for the site, and there's another slide in here that shows it pretty well. But the turnaround that you're referring to is the one right here, which would allow someone who's coming into the middle school to be able to come in, come through, come around, and then loop here and go back out without having to go to the other side of the site, or the so-called high school side of the site. On the high school side, someone could come in, come around, loop around this area. This is an island in the middle here, but you can come through, loop around this island, come back around here, just like the vans that I mentioned for the pre-K drop-off, and come back out of the site. So the theory is if you wanted to operate this site as if there was an imaginary line right down the middle, and this stayed all high school parking and circulation, and this stayed all middle school parking and circulation, you could do so with the arrangements that you see here. Now, as part of the traffic analysis and traffic study, the traffic study will not only talk about the fact that the Glenwood's Way can easily accommodate all of the traffic that would be coming into the site, but it will include some feedback about the site in general. And I can tell you that the traffic engineers are going to suggest that the most efficient way, theoretically, to run traffic through the site is a one-way circulation where traffic would come into the site on this side, come around the site, and come back out of the site over here. So you get only a kind of one way in and one way out for auto traffic coming into the site. However, there are a lot of practical reasons why that may not be a good idea, from the fact that you're taking somebody who wants to go to the high school and bringing them all the way over and making them go around the building to get there, to the fact that we've always talked about by keeping this parking area as a student parking area. It would allow high school students to come in, park, and go directly back out without circulating around the remainder of the building. So sending them in this direction all the way around the building may not make practical sense, but our intent is to design the site where everything is a minimum of 2 lanes wide, so that if you wanted at any point in time in the future to adjust the circulation pattern, to test different circulation patterns, you could. So even if we might suggest that if you, at some point in time, you could make it one way in this direction, even that one way would be 2 lanes wide. So we're going to design everything and lay it out so that you could either have that imaginary line down the middle and have the two-way traffic going all the way through, or if at some point in time you wanted to test one-way traffic, you could do that as well. But right now, it clearly shows that you could make that circulation pattern on the high school side or on the middle school side and not have to cross over.
Scott, can I ask a question about the parking?
Sure.
We presently have approximately 300 spaces at the high school, and it looks like this is 486.
Right.
So assuming we don't have a lot of kids from 5 to 8 driving to school, and we add about 75 faculty for that 5 through 8, we'd be gaining somewhere north of 100 spots
About 100
on the
spots.
same configuration.
Yeah, our goal has always been to take the number of marked spaces from about 300 to about 500, under the assumption that that would not only cover the additional spaces required as a result of the middle school coming here, but also provide you an additional 100 marked spaces. And keep in mind, that's marked spaces. There's a lot of additional parking that could occur in areas that would not necessarily be marked spaces. Yeah.
I have 2 questions. Saw the tennis coach last night, and he wanted to know if it was possible to have 6 tennis courts instead of 5. I told him I'd ask the question. I'm assuming that's a topography or wetlands issue.
It's certainly something we could take a look at. It's possible that we could make that work.
For competition purposes, 5 is great, 6 is lame. The other question I have, and maybe it's not to be answered now, is in that student parking area on the right side of the building where we anticipate high school students would park, I just would like to see if there's someone look at potentially, right now there's 1, 2, 3, 4 lanes that connect to the driveway as you go by, separated by the trees.
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, you're correct.
And I'd like to consider maybe closing 1 or 2 of those, so that limiting entrance and limiting exits, instead of having, when the bell rings, 4 cars coming on into the driveway at the same time.
Sure.
The more we can channel our student drivers in, the better.
Sure. One of the pieces of the site that we have talked about on a number of occasions that continues to remain pretty much as it is this corner, this northeast corner of the site right here. And by pretty much as it is, I mean, we've always shown it as being multi-purpose play fields in the future, although we know that those fields would be developed as new fields and would be elevated slightly versus their current elevation. But we've made some adjustments. You may remember at one point in time we had some retaining walls along here because we thought that this might be down at a lower elevation in this parking area. And so as we're learning more about the topography of the site, we're continuing to adjust all the features on the site and the changing in grade on the site to try to eliminate as many. We had said all along our goal would be to eliminate as many retaining walls as possible. So on this particular site drawing, and it's not obviously final, we haven't even moved into our schematic design phase, but you'll see that the only retaining walls are right here, and then there's one around these tennis courts right here. But as we continue to adjust the topography, proposed topography for the site, we'll be making those as small as possible and making efforts to remove them as much as possible. The area that you see here that represents 2 multi-use, multi-purpose fields side by side is probably, earlier I mentioned synthetic turf, and I know we've talked in the past about the fact that we would assume that at least one field on this site would be synthetic turf for a variety of different reasons, from the kind of ease of maintenance to the extended use, primarily the extended use you would get out of such a field, and its ability to support a lot more user groups. But one of the other reasons this area in particular may make a lot of sense as a synthetic turf field is because it is possible as part, certainly, and we're going to be meeting with, I know it's going to come up later tonight, but next week we're going to be meeting with some of the youth groups and some of the user groups for the site in general. And as part of this project, clearly all of the fields that exist on the back area of the site are going to be disrupted once the school construction starts. But it's possible that we could take this northeast corner and make that a very early phase of the project and try to give those fields back as soon as possible in the within the duration of the project before the building is complete. Give those back for use, and if they were synthetic turf fields, because they're side by side, that's a really economical way to capture a lot of synthetic turf area, and you could do a lot of different things with them, get a lot of playtime on them, and perhaps make up for the fact that there's an overall loss in the number of current grass fields, because we find, and certainly Art can speak to this as part of the discussion specifically on the advantages of synthetic turf surfaces, but we find that one single synthetic turf field can be the equivalent of 3 or 4 natural fields in terms of playtime. So if you think about both of these being in place, then you're getting somewhere between the equivalent of 6 to 8 natural fields, and it would go a long way towards relieving some of the stress associated with having to find play surfaces during the construction project, but it would also be a really good long-term investment for the town in terms of having much more playable surface. And I think we're going to come back and talk a little bit about maybe some side things, but while Art is still here, and again, tonight isn't intended to be a synthetic turf pitch or sell. Doesn't matter to us. We'll design anything you want, but it's always good to give the building committee as much information on these topics. And synthetic turf, believe it or not, just tends to be one of the most talked about subjects on any kind of greater school project, as the discussion about exactly how the site development is going to occur. So I'm going to ask him to talk a little bit about kind of our experience, what we know about it, some of the advantages, some of the things the building committee and the town may want to consider as we're continuing to talk about it. Before I do that, though, any questions, any comments?
Just one other question about the area back there. I know there's been some question about how wet it is back there. Can you just speak quickly about how we mitigate that?
I can. The area, really, this back area in general is the lowest lying area of the site. And I know that we've gotten a lot of feedback that the fields in this area sometimes remain wet. And it makes sense that they would currently remain wet for a number of reasons. One is it appears that as part of the construction of the site when the high school was initially built, that they removed some material back here and utilized it around the high school building as part of the site development. And so it resulted in this being a relatively low area, at least compared to the rest of the site. Now, we've tested all those soils, and it's not that there's a soil problem or any kind of subsurface problem. It's just that because of that lower elevation and the close proximity to the wetlands, and the fact that they're fairly flat. I mean, everybody thinks of a field as being flat, but it's actually supposed to be sloped in order to shed the water off of it. So if everything's graded off flat, there's nowhere for the water to go. It just kind of stands there. And Art can certainly speak to this as he talks about the development of these. But as part of the proposed site design, we would actually bring the elevation or the height of this entire back area up quite a bit. Not on the edges. You don't have to be worried that there's going to be, a mound here, or that you would notice it being substantially different. But even bringing it up 2 feet would completely resolve any of the standing water problems, any of the drainage problems that currently may exist on the fields. and would allow us to get the appropriate slope off of those fields so they shed water in the right direction. And then there would be a complete stormwater management system, which is a series of underground pipes, drainage, et cetera, that captures the water and charges it into the soil underground. So the water, when it gets shed, does not just get shed off of the site. It all stays on the site, but it's captured in that underground drainage system and taken into the soils, which is the way any new field or new site area would have to be designed for a lot of different reasons, including a lot of different environmental requirements. So we'll be bringing that area up, particularly the area where the building is, and then we'll also be installing stormwater management for the entire site, but specifically for those fields. So any concern whatsoever with regard to water in the area of those existing fields will be completely eliminated with the construction of the new field. And certainly, the building will be in an area that's very safe up on a solid foundation, a solid base, on good soils. I mean, we're continuing and we'll continue to do subsurface soils investigation, like I mentioned with Park, but there's nothing to suggest that there's anything at all wrong with this area other than the fact that it was leveled off almost completely flat, and it is fairly low considering when you compare it to what we would propose the grading and the elevation be there.
Is there any stormwater mitigation systems there now?
No.
Thank you.
Scott, on the two fields, would also have to put some parking in there in front?
In which area?
Oh, right there.
Yeah.
Where the student parking is shown right now.
Right.
Would that also have to be included when we do two new fields at the start of this operation?
We're looking at whether that's possible or not. It appears that the best we can do, for a variety of different reasons, is try to get the two fields in and then probably come up with some kind of physical and perhaps visual barrier around those two fields, and then allow kind of an access zone where people would have to park in the existing parking lot, which is just to the right of the existing, here's the existing high school building, as you know, and there's the parking lot to the right of it. It appears that the best we can probably do is allow people to park in that existing parking lot and in other areas around the school, and then have to walk around. We'll probably create a safe area where you can come through right along the tree line here, walk around, come to these fields, because we had hoped to be able to develop a significant part of this parking area as part of these fields and their available use during the construction project. But unfortunately, we need to keep enough area around the site to adjust the grading and to allow the contractor to work around this building and to be able to stage the construction process around the building, that it appears difficult for us to be able to capture. We might be able to capture a very small part of it, but it looks like the best we're going to be able to do is maybe get those fields in place and then make sure that there's a clear pathway and walkway. You can kind of scale it. That's going to be 50 to 60 yards that somebody would have to walk on the edge of the parking lot. Not necessarily all that different from the fact that the fields are back there now and the parking lot's here now. But some of the fields that are over here would obviously right now have closer proximity to parking. But we're going to continue to look at that. But this week we spent a little bit of time looking at it. And it looks like it'd be a little bit of a challenge to try to get a significant portion of that parking in early on.
Thank you.
You mentioned the reduced area of the retaining wall. I'm just kind of looking at that. It looks like, that's a good idea, but it looks like in phase 2, when you demolish in the high school, there's going to be a lot more work because, if the retaining wall is in that area, you may not be able to construct it till the school's out of place. Especially if it has
This
a
section
wall,
right here.
right,
Yep.
with tiebacks or whatever. And was the idea to to give the site a constant slope from the front to the back, or?
Yeah, the challenge is to try to get this large, flat surface of a field right in here and still meet the overall contour or elevation drop from here back to here. So it's, the reason for the retaining wall is to try to keep it flat across here, and then you've got to quickly get down a little bit in order to meet the natural contour of the site, and then have a flat area across here, and then a little bit of a slope down from this parking edge down to these fields, and then be able to be relatively, again, with the correct pitch for drainage, but relatively flat.
And you mentioned about combining the bus, possibly combining the bus and auto traffic at the entrance.
Yes, possibly for some period of time at the entry.
So if you were to do that, is the traffic still by code need to be separated by a curved median?
No. No, the reason we separate the bus and auto traffic is more just for functional purposes, to make sure we don't ever have a car stopped prohibiting a bus from getting by, or vice versa. So as long as we only combine them in a small section where they're not encouraged to stop. For example, if in this area there'd be no reason for a bus to stop, as their drop-off is not until here. And as long as we don't make it easy for the auto to stop in that area, we may be able to combine them for a certain distance. And the drive may end up moving over a little bit as well, when you see the next iteration of how we might handle that.
The pull-off lane by Glenwood's Way, if you were to construct that, would that mesh with the roadway, and the roadway be cold planed to make it all monolithic?
It's a good question. I don't know the details of the current condition of the paving there, and whether we'd want to do all of it over. We'd probably want to do it all over. Yeah. We'd probably do it all again. We'd probably pull that out and recompact all of that base and go in with one continuous pour over the entire area. You guys back me up on that?
Yeah. Pretty poor condition,
And the shared roads around the site, obviously they're going to have to be double width, the two-way traffic, and the access and the turning for the fire trucks also.
That's exactly right. Every one of these curves has to be radius for the fire truck all around the site. And then every one of the roadways that I talked about where there are two-way traffic, which includes everywhere, all the way through the site, would have to be sized for that. I don't know currently if they're drawn at, is that drawn at 24?
Yep, 25 actually is the
Yep.
standard in town. So.
25 feet as the width for that two-way traffic, and then where there's a turnout lane, I don't know how much available area we've got currently. Carrie, do you know what size those lanes are?
I think we have 10.
10 feet.
Yeah.
So, 35 feet plus or minus where you have the two-way plus the turnout.
My other concern is the wetland lines. I know you mentioned, just looking at the picture on the west side, you found a potential wetlands area that couldn't be built on. Are there any other areas on the site where parking might be restricted because of any wetland issues?
No, that was the only one. And just as a reminder, the only real restriction here is we had never shown anything built into this area, but we thought maybe we might have the opportunity to extend and get some more parking or some more play area, something in here. And the delineation just verified that in fact we couldn't do that. But all of our other assumptions were correct, and nothing else we found in any way prohibits anything we proposed or require us to pull anything back at all. You'll see in this particular site plan, there's slightly more parking at the rear of the building, but that comes as a result of us having adjusted the building footprint a little bit and pulled this into the building kind of in this direction a little bit more. We took this and pulled it over a little bit more in floor plan, so that's the reason there's more room back here. But that was not as a result of anything we found. It was just trying to make the building more compact and leave more site area.
You mentioned the stormwater management systems. I know this is probably for the future, but do you envision where they would be dumping out? Would they be placed in the fields or under parking? Or?
Sure. Carrie, do you mind chatting just a little bit about, and you're right, I mean, we don't know exactly, but I'm going to ask Carrie, since she's here, our engineering, to talk just a little bit more intelligently than I could about those systems and what we typically do on school.
Yeah, sure.
Not at all.
I do just want to mention a little bit more about the wetland delineation. We are currently looking at this area here, just because of snow cover. We're still trying to identify the exact delineation in that area, so we'll have some more information and updates to come on how that affects that area. But basically, the existing drainage right now, there's a couple of catch basins in the front of the school here. They tie into a larger trunk line that goes along this property line here and has a head wall in this general area here that discharges out into the wetland area. So like any other site, we'd be trying to keep the drainage patterns roughly the same. Pretty much this entire area currently discharges out into this head wall with some small areas that kind of just run off naturally untreated. So we'll be generally keeping that flow. We'll be collecting the stormwater in catch basins with deep sunk catch basins through closed drainage. We'll have some areas of rain gardens and bioswales that are surface treatment, and then also some underground chambers that will hopefully infiltrate into the ground. And then all be collected with overflows and ultimately discharged out here is the plan right now, based on our conceptual review of things.
No open basins, no retention ponds, right?
Nothing humongous and deep that you would typically see. It would be more rain gardens that have gradual slopes, nothing.
And generally speaking, we are expanding the site more than really what it is. We're basically reconfiguring the area that's already out here at the high school.
Yeah, the limit of disturbance is pretty much the same. We're not proposing any disturbance, within the tree limits. Potentially some a little bit in the back there, but.
Is it possible that the design might require underground stormwater storage?
Yes, yeah, there's high likelihood that we'll have underground systems, whether it be detention, just storage, or infiltration. Depends on what we find for the exact groundwater and soils out here. So.
And just to clarify, because not everybody knows what underground storage means. I get this picture of this giant tank that is storing water underground. The underground storage simply means that under the surface of the ground there are specialized chambers that the water can flow into, and they're designed specifically to allow the water to then infiltrate the surrounding ground underneath the surface, so you don't ever see it, and you don't have the ponding water that you have on the fields and other things. So they can take on a variety of different forms. Sometimes it's as simple as a large, 12-inch diameter perforated pipe set in gravel and stone that the water goes into and discharges into the stone. And sometimes they're more complex, larger concrete structures, but they serve the same purpose. They're just allowing the water to filtrate out of them. They capture, you can dump a lot of water into them all at one time, and then they just slowly let it infiltrate the surrounding soils. And now you don't have anything like that, so it's really easy for the site to get overwhelmed with water, and you don't have all the collection points on the site now that you would in the future. So it's really easy for standing water to occur and not get collected the way it should.
Can you explain a little bit too how it also cleans the water with the deep sumps and all in 8th grade terms?
Yes. In something like a parking area, even though you might not think about it, the water that the rainfall that comes on a parking area and then is captured into the drainage system, goes underground, is captured into the drainage system, is that actually considered contaminated water? Because you've got oils, you sometimes may have a little fuel, you may have all kinds of other contaminants on the surface of the pavement that water collects and takes underground. So as part of any development of a new site like this, as a result of environmental requirements, we have to include underground cleaning chambers, if you will. There are a variety of different names for them and manufacturers of them, but consider them cleaning chambers that take that water, send it through a variety of different filtering systems before it gets discharged back into the soil. So as part of making sure that all the water that gets discharged underground into the soils is clean, we will be required to have those kinds of systems on the stormwater management system.
Which don't exist now. I don't know how to crack it out.
I don't think I doubt you have anything, like
I believe
that
it's just
now.
the
For 50 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was hesitating because I don't know, at some point in time, somebody may have done the right thing in one small area or something, but my guess is that you don't have anything, particularly if no major work has been done in 50 years.
What about, can I ask a question? I know some people in town are familiar with it, that there used to be an old septic leaching field out, I think it's to the right behind the school. Obviously, as part of site development, that would be removed and replaced with good soils. Or
Right.
whatever needs to be done, the engineers will address that.
It's very common and very straightforward. A leaching field does nothing really to destroy the soils over time. The only thing we have to do is excavate, remove, infill, compact. It's actually a super straightforward process. It's not even very expensive. A leaching field is very inexpensive to remove compared to a lot of other things you can potentially find on site.
Any initial thoughts on the roof water collection?
Yes. The design of this building will include rainwater collection, roof rainwater collection, which means all of the rainwater that actually falls on the roof of the building gets captured into what is commonly referred to as a gray water system, even though the water is not gray. And it utilizes that water in the flushing of like toilets and urinals. And so it greatly reduces the overall water use for the building by literally tens of thousands of gallons. But it also results in the stormwater collection system not having to capture all of that water and try to infiltrate it into the ground. So it serves two highly productive purposes. Environmentally, it saves use of water, and then it avoids having to collect it, filter it, and put it into the ground. Any other questions before we talk about the shop?
Buildings, are there any, I'm just trying to picture this when this building's there and the kids are in there. Do we have any, maybe we're not this far down the road, but do we have any areas where a kid who might be waiting to be picked up and it's raining out that either has is there a covered exit, whether it's the front or the secondary exit, or I suppose the vestibule will be large enough that they can stand out of the weather?
We have shown, we talked about it, and the design of such a thing, we may discuss more on down the road. We've got an outdoor pergola area right here, right outside the cafeteria, dining, student dining, auditorium entry area. They could certainly serve that purpose on the high school side. And something could probably be introduced as well on the middle school side to offer the same kind of coverage for the same kind of opportunity. Any other questions? I'm going to ask Art to talk a little bit about synthetic turf. Please don't consider this like a formal presentation where you can't just stop Art at any point in time and ask questions. We really want this to be interactive. If at any point in time you don't understand anything or you want to talk more specifically about a particular thing, please feel absolutely free. I'm not trying to speak to you, Art, but we want this to be very casual. It's our first real conversation about it. It's really just to get the maximum amount of information out there. So ask anything that you may have on your mind as we're moving through the discussion about it.
As Scott mentioned, again, I'm a landscape architect, worked on fields. We've done 40 fields in the last 5 years, natural grass, for synthetic turf field. By no way do I represent a turf company or anything like that. As Scott mentioned, if you do turf or you synthetic turf, if you don't, either way is fine with me. This is just information. There's a lot of information on the internet about synthetic turf. I highly recommend you go and do research, but I also would recommend when you go to do research, recommend really looking at your source. Because right now the synthetic turf industry and the turf industry are kind of at odds. So there's a lot of information that the synthetic turf industry is putting out, there's a lot of things that the turf industry, the natural turf industry is putting out that conflict each other, are somewhat combative and somewhat untrue. So just look at your source. We have what we feel like is a reliable list of sources of people that are doing independent research, really looking at fields. So what are the benefits of synthetic turf? What we found is the highest benefit of synthetic turf is the hours. More hours of use. If you took a natural grass field, normally you should be playing 25 hours a week on that field, which I'm sure most fields are getting used more than that. And normally you should have a season of about 25 weeks a year, which leads to about 625 total hours a year. Now most fields at most high schools are getting used more than that. Most fields at most municipality fields are getting used more than that, especially with the introduction of sports like lacrosse, have really brought down the quality of fields. So what happens is as you get over those 625 fields, the quality of the field starts to deteriorate. On a synthetic turf field, you can play up to 52 hours a week. Now there's industries out there, if you go again do industry research, they can say 64 to 70 hours. But at a high school, you're really going to get 54 hours a week. And that's really like from 3 to 10 at night, and then your weekends, you're getting another 20 hours or so. And unless you're going to open up to like midday adult softball league during what school is, that you get 64 hours. But you actually extend your season as well, because you can play on it longer. Again, you don't have to rest the field. When we build synthetic turf fields, most people say, well, we want to let these folks play and those folks play. I say get everybody on it that you can, that's why you bought it. So when you look at that, you're at 2,280 total hours. And the reality is it's like buying 3 fields. So when you look at a synthetic turf field versus natural grass field, if you put it in, it's 3 fields. You're really investing in 3 fields. Multi-sport, you can play any sport on it. Lacrosse, soccer, field hockey, rugby, football, any sport can be played. It can be configured on it. And that really comes down to making sure that the way you build the field meets the sports that you want to play on it. Whether you want to play multi-use and have a lot of different sports on it, or you have a really specific issue. You kind of design the way the field is built with more sand and rubber, less sand and rubber, different heights and depths, and that can all be configured. All weather. If it rains, obviously I walked your field today. Everything, as everybody mentioned, in that kind of northeast corner is draining to that northeast corner. The whole field all the way across, so it's picking up that whole land. And then right at the end of it, it kind of lifts up a little bit. So there's like water there now, so I kind of sunk in when I walked down there tonight. So, even just looking at that drainage, if it pitched out and it was clear, you wouldn't be holding as much water there. But if it rains, you can play in the rain. As soon as it's done raining, you can play right on the synthetic turf field. You don't have to wait. Actually, with a natural grass field, obviously it gets muddy, and you start to tear up the field, you have to wait. You can play in snow. You can actually plow it. There are schools that have plowed it, and that's a possibility. There's really not a need mostly in the winter. Most winter sports are indoors, but you could if you want. And if you had early Thanksgiving snow, you could plow the field if you want. So it just extends the amount of use. Reduced maintenance. I talk about this because normally municipalities are not investing the amount of money they need to maintain fields. So keep this with a grain of salt as we throw these numbers out there. You know, the average cost for maintaining a natural grass field, you should be investing $15,000 per field, not just per facility. So that's $15,000 per field. So that includes, you know, cutting, mowing, fertilizing, aerating, painting. A synthetic turf field is, people will tell you that it's no maintenance or low maintenance. It's not exactly true. We usually say that it's about $10,000 to maintain a field. You still have to groom it. You still have to pick up. You still have to have someone go out and groom and move. You know, when you're playing on the field, some of the materials move around. You have to go back and adjust those materials. Sometimes if you decide not to put in the lines permanently, you have to have lines painted. All those things add up. And so then what we look at is really about a 33% reduction in maintenance. Now again, I use that as a grain of salt, as your numbers that you're probably investing into maintenance is not what they should be. So those numbers could actually end up being closer. So then we were asked, we looked at quickly, if we looked at the two fields in the upper right corner and just did a quick cost analysis. And now please keep in mind that this is kind of industry standard numbers without really looking what the field conditions are. So a natural grass field, to build a natural grass field, a nice high, like mid-level playable grass field is about $370,000. That's what it would cost. With the two fields, would be $740,000, and then there's kind of an overall construction reduction of $40,000 because you're building two fields at once, which ends up with $700,000 to build a natural grass field. So that would be those two fields in that corner. That's kind of what those would cost. If you lit those fields, you also have an advantage versus building one lit versus two lit. You would use 6 poles versus 8 for 2 fields. So if you separated those 2 fields, you put 4 on this one and 4 on that one. But if you build those 2 fields and light them at the same time, you can reduce the number of poles you need overall. So there's a reduction there for $600,000, and then you reduce the $100,000 for the additional pole, which is $500,000. So to build those 2 fields and light them is about $1.2 million. Synthetic turf. The synthetic turf field is about $850,000 to build the field. So you're building, and what that includes is the underdrain system, which is pretty extensive. You build a really extensive underdrain system because you don't want the field to lift and float, so it drains. Then you have a depth of soils, which can range from anywhere from 8 inches to 14 inches, depending on what's underneath and how much water is going to move through it. So with those 2 fields, you're looking at $1.7 million to build those 2 fields of turf, with a construction reduction of about $100,000, because you're taking out some concrete work, you're taking out that 8 to 14 inches depth out of those, and then you're getting an advantage on the turf because you're rolling out fuller lengths. So the manufacturer is going to give you a reduction because you're building longer lengths, which is to their advantage. Poles stay the same at $500,000. So the total cost for those 2 fields is $2.1 million. So you can see it's about a $900,000 difference between a natural grass field and 2 synthetic turf fields. Next one. Then we looked at, yes?
Does the estimate for the grass include an underdrain also?
It includes a drainage system that'll catch on the sides, but not an underdrain system. It would be more like a sand-based system that drains through.
The numbers for either grass and turf, the numbers you're using now, do they assume that you already have the cleared area like we do now, or does that?
Yeah. I mean, these are numbers for just the turf and the field in that profile.
Not like moving trees.
Not moving trees or anything like that. That would be part of a different site package number, but that's assuming this is just that turf number. So then there was a discussion about Riley Field, which is kind of a good number to look at, just to look at a single cost field. So again, to replace that field, again, it stays at the $370,000. You're really building just about the same size field. You would need the 4 light poles at $400,000 if you lit it. The synthetic turf field, still at $850,000 just for that interior surface. The light pole fixtures, again, at 400,000 would be $400,000. So you're looking at a difference of $770,000 and 1.2 million, 1.3 million in that range. And that would be the difference to build Riley Field. There was a little bit of a discussion of Riley Field. You know, that's a little trickier as well because you've got an existing track and you've got to deal with the existing track as well. So there's some thoughts on the cost of that as well. I one more. So then lastly is the change rate for you. So the first thing is supply and demand, and it's, you know, demand on athletic fields exceeds the supply of available land in town. If you don't have places to build new fields, you don't have enough fields in town, and you're low, you know, synthetic turf can really help make that change because you're buying 3 fields. If you did the 2 fields up in the Northeast, you're really getting 6 fields, which is a big number. Additional sports at every level increase the demand on fields, create fields that are unable to support a quality experience. I use lacrosse as the example because lacrosse is a spring sport that has high contact, high foot torsion on the field, is doing a lot of damage to fields. So now when those fields were resting in the spring, now they're getting played on and they're not really finding time to really recuperate and recover. And lacrosse is a relatively new sport. The other piece that's coming is rugby has been making its headway a little bit as well. So as sports come and go, they're going to grow and field rest becomes an issue. And then lastly, the long-term gains outweigh the upfront costs. Again, this is just some quick information. I look at the quick 2 field costs. Again, synthetic turf. I'm sorry, I have the title backwards. The synthetic turf on the left and natural grass. But $2.1 million for the synthetic turf, the 1.6 for the fields. Lighting costs. No, that's not right. The synthetic turf, what I did was multiply times 3 because that's what you'd be getting the additional 3 fields. So it would be 1.6 versus 2.1. The 5 versus 1.5 million. The 500,000 versus 1.5 million. The 200 versus the 200,000 in maintenance versus 900,000 in maintenance. So the difference is the 4.5 million versus the 1.8, 0.9 million, because you're really buying, in this instance, 6 fields. Does that make sense? That you're really purchasing more fields than you actually would be able to build. Go ahead.
Can you answer 2 issues that you hear? Injuries.
Yep.
Does turf cause more injuries or does grass cause more injuries? And then the second thing is the eventual need to replace either field, whether it's grass or whether it's synthetic.
Sure, I can talk about both of those. Injuries, there's a lot of research out there, and I can bring you information about injuries. And again, the NFL came out with an injury report that talked about the concerns with synthetic turf, and they were basically looking at knee injuries and ankle injuries. And there's some concern over knee injuries and ankle injuries at the NFL. When you're talking about 350-pound men pushing against each other, it's much different than at the high school level. So a lot of research has been focusing on kind of at the academic collegiate level. And a lot of the research is coming out and saying there's injuries are kind of on the same playing field, on a well-maintained field. As for replacement, the life cycle on synthetic turf field is anywhere from 10 to 12 years. So that field would have to be replaced in 10 to 12 years, depending on use. But you're not replacing the whole system. You're only replacing the surface system and then doing some upgrades on the surface from there. So you would pull the carpet up, kind of do some regrading, and then lay down regrading. Your drainage system would be in place, your base would be in place, your concrete would be in place, and would just be some minor repairs to that. So your overall costs to replace that field are not going to be the 1.6. Today's dollars, it would be about 350,000 to 400,000. Down the road, depending on what happens to turf, the industry could change. But generally, that's what you would be replacing, not the whole system.
What's the lifespan of a new grass field?
The lifespan of a new grass field is also technically supposed to be 10 to 12 years. But again, most of those fields don't get replaced. You really should be digging out, coming back, redoing the base. What ends up happening on natural grass fields is they tend to get silt laden because a lot of materials ends up coming from parking lots onto those fields and fills in that gaps, and then that material really should be removed or replaced.
So is that another 300?
Now you're back to 307,000 to replace that.
There's more maintenance to a natural grass field than
There is more maintenance to a natural grass field. There is a lot more upkeep. There is aerating and, going through mowing, fertilizing, especially.
Is that cost from?
Yeah, that's the 30,000 versus the 20,000. So if you're looking at the 3 years for the two fields, so it's 15,000 per field. This is 900,000 versus 200,000. So the maintenance costs are pretty escalated.
Can you talk a little bit more about the maintenance per field, the tools required?
Sure. Well, in this number is what's included in that number is the groomer and sweeper, which are your two really main tools that you use to upkeep the field. The groomer basically goes through and moves the sand and rubber pellets and evens them out. The sweeper picks up, trash, leaves, those types of things. And also there's times on the groomer sweeper. The other thing that happens, and really that only happens like every 4 to 6 weeks, so it's not like it's a constant maintenance thing. There are some spot maintenance things that need to happen, like the corner kick at soccer. So somebody's constantly kicking that area like a push broom, just to move material around, kind of at the goal box at a lacrosse, where the goalie's going back and forth like this the whole game. And the worst thing is, really, actually, it's not the games, because really the games they only play, it's practice, where they're kicking goalie kicks, corner kicks 100 times over that area. So, and it's really a push broom and moving it back. So the maintenance is generally, it's fairly simple. Painting, you can paint yourself, hire to paint, those sorts of things. Yes.
Do you need a special machine for this maintenance?
For the what?
For the maintenance?
Well, the groomer and sweeper are included in the number, in this number, so they come with the actual turf. And what normally happens is, there's two types of machines. There's a hydraulic machine and there's a self-driven machine. If you have a hydraulic tractor, we recommend the hydraulic machine. If you don't, we recommend the self-driven machine. It's mechanical, it runs off its wheels. Those are included in that 1.6 number. So when you get that actual, it comes with it. It comes with training. They come out, they teach you how to use it. They tell you when to do it. They give you a log. There's a pretty extensive maintenance that comes with the synthetic turf package and training that comes with it.
And you mentioned that if you were to replace the grass field, it might be $370,000. Has there been a study on the average replacement price of the turf?
Yeah, I mean, the replacement turf is kind of coming into its own right now, right? Because you figure 10 to 12 years, turf industry kind of really trickled into 10 years ago, 12 years. I mean, there's the old turf, which was the, concrete and rub. So the new turf it's kind of coming into its right as we speak, because a lot of places are starting to replace their turf now. Those numbers have been hitting, 350 to 400 so far. So they seem to be in line with, kind of what the turf costs and the replacement costs are. But we're kind of right at that edge right now.
You know what East Bridgewater High School put in for turf? I've heard it's great. I haven't seen it.
It's AstroTurf.
It's AstroTurf?
Yeah, we did the field. It's an AstroTurf field.
Which is, that makes me flash back to 1970s. It's not 1970s.
AstroTurf is not AstroTurf that was in the Veterans Stadium where the Eagles play. I grew up in Philadelphia, so I don't remember. No, it's not the same turf. I mean, it's a lot of, the makeup of turf is really fibers, sand and rubber, and then what's really important is obviously the base, but the turf itself, a multi-use field is really 2.5 inches of depth, and then you have a mix of sand and rubber. Now, the sand and rubber, every manufacturer will argue what the mix of sand and rubber is right. So if it's 70% rubber versus 30% or 40 versus 60, and they'll all argue that that's their kind of pattern. So if you can't go in and say, I want it to be 60-40, because they'll say, well, that's their pattern, or that's, so what we do is a range. And what you're really looking for is to get the field to be not too soft and not too firm. And so there's a series of testing when the field goes in that test for safety. Obviously, the most important thing is concussions. So there is what's called the GMAX test, and make sure that the field's safe for kids to play on and that there's not risk of concussion. Not that it doesn't happen on hard hits, but it's just to make sure that the field itself is safe. And what you'll see is, when you talk about synthetic turf, is because it's such a controlled environment versus kind of a grass field that's been played on and overplayed on, that field, the GMAX on that is probably at a level that's really, really dangerous, especially in the shoulder seasons when the ground is frozen or it's still hard. So there's a series of tests. And all of that is part of in that number. So there's GMAX testing, there's painting, there's all of that is included in that.
What's being carried in our budget? Are we assuming anything in our budget, like there's 4 grass fields or 1 turf field, or?
In the budget thus far, we have assumed a certain amount, I believe it's $6 million, allocated to non-reimbursable site costs. And we indicated that some of those costs would be for parking and drives that exceed the MSBA cap on site costs. As you may recall, MSBA caps how much they participate in site costs, not because they don't want you to develop the site, just because they established a policy years ago of trying to control how much they spent on the site, or how much they were involved in the reimbursement of the site. Within that allotment, we also expect that you would be able to pay for some other site amenities that they will not pay for, reimburse for, like the tennis courts and like a synthetic turf field. The phase of the project where we'll know more specifically is the phase we're moving into now, schematic design, because for the first time, the site plan is evolving. We have a topographical survey that's accurate. We know the geotechnical conditions. We're starting to iron out all the details. So in this phase of the project, when we do all of the detailed cost estimating, we'll know exactly what the site costs are and whether that means no turf field, 1 turf field, 2 turf fields, and we'll be able to look at that cost and discuss it with you in detail. That's the reason, as Art presents the numbers up here tonight's not a decision point. We just want to start arming you with the information, because some point out there in the future, we'll have to have the budget discussion and how much will fit in the established budget and be able to talk. And then you'll have this information for when you have that discussion.
And so this cap that the MSBA puts on site expenditures that's reimbursable, and then the extra money in the budget for additional site work that's not reimbursable, that's something you've done in all the other projects. This is not unique to Abington.
Yes, good point. Every single project we've been involved with, in fact, there may be some, but I'm not aware of any MSBA-funded projects that did not include a piece of the site cost that was not reimbursable by them, because their policy is intended to pay for some of your site cost, but the reason they develop a cap on it is because they determined that urban schools in the city, where there is no site, where there is no land, were being penalized if, for example, they came to a town like Abington and paid for all of the site, and then they went to that urban Boston city school that had no site, and so therefore they got no money associated with site. So although it may seem bizarre that that's one of the areas that they limit funding, their rationale is just that. And so because they cap site cost, all projects that we've been involved with, all projects that I'm even familiar with, did include a significant component of non-reimbursed site costs. There may be there may be a city school or something that's an exception because they had no site, but typically you're right, Sean, that's the case.
Just space-wise in that corner where we're talking about potentially 2 turf fields, is there enough space for appropriate seating and facilities if we wanted to for one of the fields?
Yeah, I mean, as we continue to push and pull the site, we can look at making space. We have certain distances that we have to provide through, regulations, MIA regulations or fitness regulations. Right now, we're showing 15 feet all the way around the field. It's kind of like the max distance from what we can have. As we push and pull, that may grow, that may shrink, but as we work through that.
So it's safe to say that if we had 2 turf fields up there, we'd be able to host varsity games with the exception of most likely football?
Yeah, that's true. And that doesn't limit you from practicing football.
Right, no, absolutely.
And you'll notice there's a slight difference in the size of these fields and then the size of this field right here. Art, if you could just explain that.
Obviously, as we're pushing and pulling the site, the 2 fields in the back were considered to be multi-use to fit everything but football. So they're 200 by 330, and then if you took out the 215s all the way across, you get a 360 yard or 360 foot field, which is 120, which is a football field. But it's not a true football field because you need to go 10 feet beyond it. On the front, what we wanted to have was a big space to include what was a big soccer field. So if you wanted to have, it's 400 by 225. So you have the biggest soccer field that you can get. So it's kind of an international field almost. That gives you room, as you talk about maintenance too, to shift fields around, move within that space so Goldilocks places can rest within that space as well.
Can you just say that again about the 2 top fields where the turf is? Could there be a football field painted on it?
There could be a football field painted on it. Your end zone line would be right at the edge of the concrete.
Would that be large enough to play potentially like a youth football game on there? I guess is my...
Yes.
Any other questions? Good questions.
Beautiful, thank you.
We'll be talking about it a lot more, as well as everything else with the project, but we wanted to just give you some facts on that. We're not going to spend too much time on it, but just to let you know, we're continuing to update and refine the details of all the floor plans. In the next couple of weeks, we'll have more discussions with staff and administration on those specific areas. So we're not going to go through it until we've gone through it with them a handful of iterations, but plans continue to get updated and are actually moving very well, because we decided to go ahead and do a much more advanced submittal to MSBA. And so the plans are further along than they would typically be for preferred schematic design, and getting good input continues to get better and better. And I think that's everything that we wanted to go over tonight. That's a lot.
Any other questions for Scott? All right, next on the agenda, I'm going to ask Mary to give a quick budget update.
Yes, included in your package is an updated budget. It's on the last page of the agenda. Basically, we only received one invoice this month. It was from AI3. It was a partial payment for a traffic study work, and it was, I think, $696. A small payment. It doesn't complete the payment amounts for the traffic study because they're going to continue through schematic design. At this point, both AI3 and KBA has continued to perform work on the project, but because we have not completed the study phase of the project and been approved for schematic design, we're not really allowed to invoice, and that's why you haven't seen any invoices from either firm for a couple of months. Hopefully, following March, particularly AI3 will be paid for all of their hard work over the last couple of months. So we're continuing to track, actually below budget, as you can see in the budget report. We continue to hold a good amount for contingency above those commitments for contracts.
The committee thanks both of you for your pro bono. Last line item, general business, and items not reasonably anticipated 48 hours in advance. The only thing I want to touch on, the document with the information that we all co-authored regarding the project and just answering some frequently asked questions. Each of you have copies of those on your chairs. I just ask that you share those while you're out in the community, whether it's at a youth sports event, whether it's a play, whatever it may be, just so we can continue to ensure the factual dissemination of information out within the community. Also, the more people you can direct to the website so that they can get on the updates, both minutes, as well as notices for these meetings. We continue to strongly encourage community input and people to be present at the meetings so that we can get feedback and get questions answered by the professional staff as quickly as possible. Future meetings, we do have a working committee meeting tomorrow morning on March 7th, 7:30 a.m. at the North School. We're also, as Scott had alluded to, on March 12th, a couple of us are going to actually be meeting with some of the youth sports groups. That's at 6:30 p.m. in the Abington Police Community Room. You're not required to attend, but certainly all of you are welcome and encouraged to do so.
What's that again?
That's March 12th. At 6:30 p.m. in the Police Community Room. And then we just need to schedule our next full committee meeting, Mary. We're also, thank you, Sean. Also meeting March 11th, we're meeting with the Abington Rotary to get some of these handouts to them and answer any questions that they may have about the project as well. So, we're doing as much of the community outreach as we can. The more groups we can get in front of, ensure that they get the right information and factual answers to the questions that they have, the better will be. Mary, what do you think would be a...
So we will be meeting, or hopefully attending the MSBA Board of Directors meeting on March 26th. So it would probably make sense to either meet on Tuesday, April 1st or Thursday, April 3rd to talk about the outcome of that board meeting. And I would think at that point, AI3 needs to provide an update on where we stand over the last month of continued design development. Mm-hmm. So Tuesday or Thursday work.
Okay, does anyone have any conflicts with Tuesday the 1st? Do we have any conflicts with Thursday the 3rd?
The 3rd is slightly better if it doesn't affect anybody else.
Something about me on April Fool's Day.
That would really crack the door open for us to do all kinds of stuff.
All right, well, I don't want to take you away from your hijinks and pranks. All right, let's go with Thursday, April 3rd at 6 p.m. We will leave the location to be determined. We'll tentatively plan on the police community room. I think that space works rather well. But if that space is not available, we can just as easily host it here. So we'll tentatively plan on the police station, but we'll confirm that location as soon as we have an opportunity to make sure that space is available.
I'm one of the faculty member here at high school. Our high school musical is next weekend at the Pro Layout, and I'm more than welcome your presence. It's a good crowd. It was Pro Auditorium, and it always has been. So that's next Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So more than welcome to set up anything you need or have people present.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy the show. So
That is the most important. Great show. Do we have anything else for the good of the group?
thank you again. Great work.
Yeah, and I apologize that we got a little bit late start, but thank you guys all for the contribution this evening.
Motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second? Discussion? All right. Thank you, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Motion carried, meeting adjourned.
No,